أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, brothers and sisters, and welcome to, I think this is our 29th session on Shia Imamiyya doctrine. Last week we started a new chapter, Imamah and Khilafah, and we put behind us one session in that regard. So this will be our second session on Imamah and Khilafah, based on the book of Doctrines of Shia Islam of Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani, as you probably all know. Alright, I don't need to mention this, but anyone who has questions can just type their questions in, and we'll try to answer them, or I'll try to answer them as we go along. So don't be shy, and ask anything you feel that you need to ask. Last week we went through articles 83 to 85, and I'll just go over those very quickly. I do know that sometimes people listen to these recordings later, and so when they're listening to them one after another, they'll listen to one session and then they'll listen to the next one, and it might get repetitive for them, because I'll go over what we've gone over the last session. Since they're listening to both sessions together, then for them it might get a little repetitive. But the reason for that is that, the ones who might tune in online, they are getting this once a week, so I have no choice but to go over what we went through very quickly so that we can pick up where we left off. So Article 83 had to do with what the term Shia means and the history of Shiaism. Very brief, very, very brief history of it, meaning till when it dates back to. We went through that and how there's differences of opinion here. I even talked about how there are some people who might even say, that are not Shia, of course, who will believe that theological Shiism goes back to the time of after the death of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, his martyrdom, during the time of the Tawwabun, which is kind of strange, but that's how they see it. Some people, others will see it differently. The Shia school believes that this was something that started during the Prophet's time. Even we have proof for that, at least for our proof that is convincing to us that this was there during the Prophet's time. I'm not going to go through those the different reasons for that. Each of these, now that we're in Imamah and and Khilafah, we have to understand that there's a lot going on here in the world of academics and Hawza and seminaries and all that, Shi'i and Sunni. There are many, many books written on this topic. Whether you are Shi'i or Sunni, it's a super important topic, and so there will be lots of works out there. We have to understand every chapter, every article that we go through might have tons of books written on that specific topic, as you shall see today, inshallah. There are certain things that we're going to cover very, very, very briefly and concisely, that we might have tens upon tens of books regarding that one specific subtopic regarding Imamah and Khilafah. Alright, so that's Article 83. Article 84 spoke about how, look, even if we don't have, assuming we don't have textual proof for something like this, that the Prophet had to appoint somebody after him, we have intellectual reasoning and rationale for that. That, look, it doesn't make sense that the Holy Prophet, the way he was, with all the threats, internal, external, enemies of Islam, those who were acting to be part of the Muslim nation, but they really weren't, and they were hypocrites, all of these threats, multifold, this multifold threat that was threatening the very existence of Islam, and other reasons, like how the Prophet knew that his people are still they're tribalistic, how it won't take much to get them to be at each other's throats, and so on. All of these different reasonings push us to reach this point without the help of any text or hadith or Quranic verse even, that look, the Prophet, it doesn't make sense. It's just not him not to appoint somebody after him, not to at least share with the people what they're supposed to do after him in this regard, regarding who is to succeed him and lead the people. That's article number 84. Article number 85 had to do with a continuation of what we were talking about, the whole threat. So 84 and 85, both of them actually have to do with what I said about how it just doesn't make sense, keeping in mind and taking into consideration the external and internal threats of Islam, for the Prophet not to appoint somebody, or to not at least share with the people what they're supposed to do in that regard. Okay, that brings us to Article 86. Article 86 is a new subject that we're going to start today. And it goes like this, that, okay, if the Holy Prophet, if we come to this conclusion that he must have done something in this regard, it doesn't make sense for him to just keep his mouth shut and not do anything about it, then there's one of two things that he must do. One, appoint somebody, a specific person, or number two, for him to at least tell the people that they should choose somebody after him, right? No, but we see that none of the above, some people believe that none of the above took place. Brothers and sisters, this is super important once again, that the Holy Prophet at least should tell the people, even if you believe that he didn't appoint somebody after him, he should at least let the people know that they're the ones who should appoint. Why should he leave this world without even telling the people, without even addressing the issue? That's the thing. How can he not even address the issue? Okay? If he's not going to appoint somebody, then he should at least tell the people, hey, I am not appointing anybody. You should choose someone amongst yourselves. How come we don't even have proper textual proof for that even? So according to the Shia school, one of the two has to happen. Either he appoints someone himself, or he lets the people know that they need to choose somebody. Okay? Now, I'm going to read off of this. Ayatollah Subhani, he makes a point here, and that is that when we look into the Prophet's life, what we find is that he actually has done this. One of the two that was mentioned, he has taken upon himself to do it. Now, let's read. It says, it should be clear which of these two perspectives is corroborated by the Quran, the Sunnah, and the events in the life of the Prophet. A close examination of the life of the Prophet from the day he was commanded to proclaim the new faith first to his near kin, or nearest of kin, then to all mankind, reveals that he repeatedly made clear the distinctive qualities of his successor, thereby indicating that the means by which the leadership of the community was to be established was that of explicit designation, tansis it's called in Arabic. He made it clear to the people, this is something that you have to have divine instruction for, and not election by the people. Alright, so what did Ayatollah Subhani do here so far? When we started from last week, what we said was, he made it clear that it's not possible, knowing the Prophet and the times the Prophet was in, and the circumstances, for him not to say anything about this. He must have addressed it, one. Two, what we're talking about today is, okay, if he has to address it, he has two ways to address it. Number one is to specifically appoint somebody. Number two, tell the people, hey people, choose someone amongst yourselves. Now, he's saying, Ayatollah Subhani, what he's saying is, out of these two that he has to do, in our opinion, and can't just leave it unaddressed, out of these two, which one did he choose, the Holy Prophet? The Holy Prophet chose the first one, where he appoints somebody specifically. He didn't leave it to the people and tell the people, hey people, you need to appoint someone amongst yourselves. Right? So what's your proof for that, Ayatollah Subhani? So far what we had was more intellectual endeavor. And through intellectual reasoning, we came to the conclusion that he must have done one of these two. Addressed it generally or specifically. Addressed it by telling the people to choose someone after him, or addressed it by choosing someone himself. Which one of the two? He says it's the one where the Prophet appointed someone himself, directly, specifically. Okay, what's your proof for that? Here, you can't bring intellectual reasoning anymore. Here, you have to have textual proof for your claim. And that's what he does exactly. He brings, once again, five reasons out of texts that we have, hadiths that we have, that will show that, he says, that will show that the Prophet chose to specifically appoint somebody. Okay. Now, before I get into them, there are 5 hadiths that are very famous. 2 points I want to make here. Number 1 is that these hadiths, if you're going to use them, they have to be found in both Shi'i and Sunni sources. They can't just be in Shi'i books. Number one. Number two is that if you find these hadiths in these books, that doesn't mean that it's over now. Okay, what we were claiming has been proven. No, no, no. We have to go and see exactly what is said in these hadiths and see if the hadiths match the claim that the Shia or Ayatollah Subhani here specifically has and is making. Okay, this is super important. Some people, I mean, this is a very basic and easy point to grasp, but there are some people who don't get this point. They say, oh, why are we going to non-Shi'i sources for this matter? Because if you want to use proof against somebody, you have to use that which they agree on, not that which you take as a given, but they don't agree on with you. I think that's pretty clear. We don't need to talk about that too much. Now, these are points that we have to keep in mind. I personally, these hadiths that we're going to get into, like hadith of Thaqalain, like the hadith of maybe later on Ghadir and stuff like that, these brothers and sisters, we have to keep in mind. These are hadiths that if there is so much discussion on them, that books upon books upon books have been written on them and on the topic of these hadiths, especially in the Shi'i world. You will have books and books and books on hadith of Thaqalain, for example. Books and books and books on, for example, hadith of Ghadir and others. Alright, so we have to understand what we're going to cover here is very, very concise and might not do the job for anybody who might be listening. But as I've said again and again, what are we after in these classes is just to see what the Shia has to say, right? But not get into too much detail because we won't be able to go through everything. And it's already taken 30 sessions to get to halfway through the book, and another 30 to finish the book, hopefully, inshallah. If we're going to go into all details, it'll take hundreds of lessons and sessions. So, yeah, we're keeping it concise here, but this is. I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page here and understands that this isn't everything we have to say. And we know there are some answers to what we say, and then we have answers to those answers and challenges as well. All right, having said that, he brings 5 hadiths here to show that the Prophet chose to specifically appoint someone, not to just leave it to the people. Number 1, hadith of Yawmud Dar, it's called. Hadith of Yawmud Dar is that famous story of the Holy Prophet that the Quran also talks about. There's a verse in the Quran, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. That, O Prophet, now the time has come after 3 years of Islam. The advent of Islam, 3 years passed, and now the time came for the Prophet to make his call to Islam public. Where does he start from? Ashiratuhul aqrabin, his close relatives. That's where he starts his mission from. Alright. And so there's a hadith in this story that is referred to as the hadith of Yawm ad-Dar, the day of the home. Why? Because the Prophet was in his home. He invites the big shots of Quraysh that are his relatives, like Abu Lahab and others, and they are sitting there, and he makes his invitation to Islam there for the first time to them officially. So it says, 3 years after the beginning of the Prophet's mission, he was commanded by God to proclaim openly his call with the revelation of this verse, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, and warn thy tribe of near kindred. Warn your close relatives. Sometimes you have to translate the English even. Alright. The Prophet invited the chiefs of the Banu Hashim and said to them, I have brought for you the best of this world and the next. God has commanded me to invite you to this religion of Islam. Which of you will help me establish this religion to be my brother and my successor? In other words, whoever from this day and on this day, when I am alone, I don't have support, chooses to support me, will enjoy successorship of mine after me. So he said this. No one gets up except Imam Ali alayhi salam. Imam Ali was very young back then. It says he repeated this question 3 times, and each time it was Ali alone who stepped forward, declaring his readiness to help the Prophet. Then the Prophet said, truly, this is my brother, my heir and my successor among you. Okay? Now we have this hadith. We have this hadith, of course, in Shi'i sources probably, but the question is, do we have it in Sunni sources? And he has some citations down there at the bottom where he says, yes, it's there. Musnad Ahmad, Tarikh al-Tabari, Tafsir al-Tabari, and so on. But once again, as I said, each of these hadiths might have books written on them, and where they dissect the sources of each of these hadiths. Okay, so that's the first one. Second hadith, the hadith of manzila. Right? Manzila means the station of something, the rank of something. And so, we all know, you've probably heard, especially the Shia have heard this story as they grew up, as they've been growing up, of how the Holy Prophet was going to battle, and I think it was the Battle of Tabuk, yeah, and Imam Ali was left behind and was not allowed to come. The Prophet told him to stay behind and take care of the people that were staying behind in Medina. Now what happens is Imam Ali gets upset. He wishes he could be with the Prophet. The Prophet says, hey, don't fret. Don't fret. Why? And then he says this hadith. So it says here, the Prophet on various occasions indicated that the station and rank of Ali in relation to him was that of Harun, the Prophet Musa's brother, in relation to Prophet Musa. Denying Ali only one degree comprised in the station of Harun, that of prophethood. So the hadith is a famous one. I'll explain it a little bit more after I go through the hadith itself. The Prophet said in the hadith that is almost mutawatir, he says here. Yeah, in Farsi it says qarib bitawatur. It's very close to being mutawatir. And we'll talk about mutawatir later. Or maybe I should talk about it now, because we'll need this later as well. Mutawatir, a mutawatir hadith, some of you might know, is a hadith that has been mentioned so many times by so many people in so many different sources that one becomes sure that it's impossible for all of these people to be lying, for all of these people to have been mistaken, to have misheard it. Yeah? You're sitting here, you're sitting in your room, or you're sitting in the library. One person comes and says, yeah, there's like a three-legged dog outside. And then some other person comes in. And then some other person comes in. The next day you go, some other person. And then after a while, you're like, okay, there must be a three-legged dog out there, because all these people won't be mistaken about something. And they won't be mistaken, or they won't be lying altogether, because they don't even know each other. I'm coming here to the library every day. The people who are coming in and out, they don't know each other. It's not like they got together and decided to just lie to me about this. Yeah, that's a dumb example, but whatever. You get what I'm trying to say. That if a hadith is narrated enough by enough people on different occasions, in a way that one becomes sure that, okay, these people, they must have not been able to get together and just say, hey, let's all lie about this, or they couldn't have all been mistaken about what they heard, that hadith is referred to as a mutawatir hadith. And it is kind of subjective, but there are some hadiths out there that everyone becomes sure that the Prophet said this because of how many times it's been narrated. Now in this hadith of manzila, he says it's not mutawatir, it's qarib. It is close. It's this close to being mutawatir. So it's way up there still. Okay? It says, what is the hadith? It says, O Ali, anta minni bimanzilati Haruna min Musa, illa annahu la nabiyya ba'di. O Ali, your rank or manzila in relation to me is that of Harun in relation to Musa. That means the same way Harun was exactly like Musa alayhi salam, you are like that to me. But one exception is made. And what is that? إِلَّا أَنَّهُ لَا نَبِيَّ بَعْدِي. There is no prophet to come after me. Okay, O Ali, the same way Harun was to Musa, you are to me. So what was Harun to Musa, brothers and sisters? Harun to Musa was a prophet, just like Prophet Musa was a prophet. Yes, Prophet Musa was a higher prophet, but at the end of the day, they're both prophets. Now here, the Holy Prophet Muhammad compares Imam Ali to Harun. But he says, look, there's one difference. Harun was a prophet, you're not a prophet, there's no prophet after me. The Shia says, okay, if you draw a comparison between two things, and then you make an exception and you say, okay, there's just one exception that these two are not like each other, but the rest, what it implies is that in the rest of the aspects they are alike. And this is where this is that focal point of the Shia's argument. The Shia say the Prophet makes an exception here to how Imam Ali is like the Prophet. Yes, that means that he's way up there. Yeah, he's not a prophet though. If there were any other differences between Imam Ali and the Holy Prophet, the Prophet should have said it there, because he's making exceptions, but he only made one exception. He said there's only one exception, and that you're not a prophet after me. In other words, that you have every other responsibility that I had. Okay? That's how the Shia uses this hadith. It says, at the time of Moses, and this hadith proves that Ali clearly had the rank of a caliph and a minister like Harun, but not that of a prophet. Naturally, if the meaning were other than that of affirming in regard to Ali, all the ranks apart from prophethood, there would have been no need to make an exception of prophethood alone. The fact that the only exception that is made is prophethood shows that everything else affirms that everything else the Prophet had also was in Imam Ali. All the responsibilities, all the maybe knowledge even, and all of these things Imam Ali also enjoyed. So that's the second hadith he has, hadith of Manzila. The third hadith, the hadith of Safina, the ark. I'll just read off of it. It says, the Prophet likened his Ahlul-Bayt to Noah's ark. ألا إن مثل أهل بيتي فيكم مثل سفينة نوح في قومه من ركبها نجا ومن تخلف عنها غرق. Which means that is not the likeliness or the likeness of my Ahlul Bayt among you like the ark of Noah among his folk? Whoever takes refuge therein is saved, and whoever opposes it is drowned. So Ayatul Subhani explains now. He says, we know that Noah's ark was the sole place of refuge for people seeking to save themselves from that, that great flood. So brothers and sisters, we have to understand when things are compared to each other, right? We have to see why they were compared to each other. Why is it likened? Why is the Ahlul Bayt likened to the ark of Nuh alayhi salam? Well, the ark of Nuh was the only means for people to save their lives when the great flood came. If that's the case, then if the Ahlul Bayt are also like his ark, that means if you want salvation, if you want deliverance, and you're not interested in eternal damnation, then what do? You jump on this ark of Ahlul Bayt. That means you follow them. Thus, according to this hadith, the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet is the sole refuge for those seeking protection against the crazy phenomena that confront humanity. The sources of delusion and confusion, misguidance that confront humanity. Okay, so that's the hadith of Safina. What's he saying these for again? Ayatul Subhani is mentioning all these hadith to show that yes, we understand that the Prophet must have addressed the issue of imamah and khilafah. And we say since we're sure he addressed it, there's two ways he could have addressed it. One, to specifically appoint someone. Two, to tell the people, hey people, after I pass away, I need you to choose somebody. Ayatul Subhani said that the Prophet, he adopted the first method and the first means of himself specifically appointing. We said, Ayatul Subhani, what's your reasoning? He said, I'll bring you textual reasoning. 3 of them we've covered so far. Hadith of Yawm ad-Dar, Hadith of Manzila, Hadith of Safina. Number 4, Hadith of Amanul Ummah, the safety of the nation of Islam, the Muslim nation. There's another hadith here for that. As I've said before as well, these are hadiths that he in his book is citing the sources for in the footnotes. Okay, so these are hadiths that we find in Sunni sources as well. I do have a little explanation to give though. I hope I remember in the end, after I go through all 5 of these hadiths, regarding this matter of it being in the Sunni books. Things are not as clear cut as they may seem sometimes. What is the hadith of Amanul Ummah, the safety of the Muslim nation? It says the Prophet made it known that he saw his Ahlul Bayt as a source of unity and a means of distancing his ummah and nation from divisiveness, saying, now this is the hadith, النجوم أمان لأهل الأرض من الغرق وأهل بيتي أمان لأمتي من الاختلاف فإذا خالفتها قبيلة من العرب اختلفوا فصاروا حزب إبليس. It's a pretty heavy hadith here. It says, just as the stars are a means of securing the people of the earth against drowning and destruction, my Ahlul-Bayt is a means of securing my nation from division. If a tribe among the Arabs opposes them, they fall into dispute and become part of shaitan's, what's the word? They become shaitan's party. Yes. His minions, it says here. Alright. So that's number 4. Hadith number 5, Hadith of Thaqalain, which of course, as you all know, is one of the most important hadiths we have in regards to the Khilafah, and not just of Imam Ali, but the descendants of Imam Ali as well, the Imams and the Ahlul-Bayt alayhim wassalam. Alright, what do we have here? What we have here is a lot of work, okay, to do. A lot to cover. Before I get into this hadith, I want to mention that point that I said. I hope I don't forget. I know I said I'll leave it for, what's it called? After all 5 hadiths. But I think it's better to mention it here before we get into the 5th hadith, because the 5th hadith is going to take a little bit of our time. The point I want to make is this. Sometimes, man, people will list all of the different sources of a hadith. Oh, look at all these Sunni sources for hadiths, for certain hadiths that we have for it that we will use to prove the imamah of Ahlul-Bayt. Brothers and sisters, we have to understand. And I'm not saying this so that now we don't use these sources anymore. No. Or that, these don't help or they're valueless. No. Academically speaking, even if it's a 10th tier book and source, it still has value. It's better than nothing, okay? Sometimes having weaker sources for something, if you have like 10 weak sources, those weak sources together supplement each other, and it's a strong reason for something. But nonetheless, I'm saying this so that we understand our brothers and sisters in the Sunni school of thought. We have to understand where they come from sometimes, because you hear here and there, sometimes when people are lecturing, people are talking about this, they're like, yeah, how dare you go against the Ahlul-Bayt or not follow that, because no one goes against them these days. Everyone right now says we love Ahlul-Bayt. But you'll hear this, that people will say, how can you not follow the Ahlul-Bayt in everything while your own books have hadiths about that? Look, this is a very general and generic thing to say. And if we're going to use that argument, brothers and sisters, I hate to break it to you, we have certain things in our sources too that might go against what we believe in sometimes. And someone who comes and says, oh, you Shia, look, your own books say this, our answer to them is, you don't even know how Shia scholarship works. We have to use these sources, bounce them off of our more reliable sources. And that's the job of a Shia scholar. If that's our answer to them, then they have the same answer to us. Come on, people. Like, be fair here. Be fair. Yes, the sources, one thing that you have in the Sunni sources that there is nothing that cannot be doubted and questioned at all is love of Ahlul-Bayt. That is something that is ijma'i, unanimously accepted by all schools of thought except the Nawasib and the followers of that Umayyad version of Islam. Other than that, everyone knows you love the family of the Holy Prophet, okay? What we're discussing right now is imamah. You can love Ahlul Bayt but not believe that that Imam Ali is the first Imam, right? We have to understand this. Loving does not necessarily equal that if I love them, they have to be the first Imam, or they have to be the Khulafa and the Imams after the Holy Prophet, yeah? Or that I have to follow whatever they say. No, not necessarily, right? These two don't necessitate each other. People will say, from the Sunni school of thought, that look, we respect them, we love them, but we don't have reason to believe that when it comes to Islam, we have to follow them necessarily. Okay? And loving someone does not entail that necessarily. It does not necessitate that you have to follow them. Right? Think about it. We love, as Shia, we love, for example, some of the other descendants of the Holy Prophet as well, that might even qualify as Ahlul-Bayt maybe. Yeah? But we don't necessarily get our Islam from them. Yes? We have the brother of, sometimes the brothers of the Imams were very good individuals. Very righteous individuals. We love them to death, but we don't follow them necessarily. They themselves would follow the Imams. So loving doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow them. Right? And that's what the Sunni brothers and sisters will tell us. They say we love them to death, but we have not been convinced that they have to necessarily be the first Khalifa, or they have to be necessarily the ones we go to learn Islam. But then you can't tell these people, but look, it's in your books, it's in your books. Love of Ahlul-Bayt is in their books. Following Ahlul-Bayt is there, scattered, yes. We acknowledge that, and we know that. But the books and sources that have those hadiths that sometimes will imply that Ahlul-Bayt have to be followed, not only just loved, but followed, those sources are not first-hand sources from a Sunni perspective. Brothers and sisters, Hadith al-Thaqalain, we're going to talk about it now, okay? This hadith, the way the Shia believes in it, and the way you find it in other Sunni sources, it's not in Sahih al-Bukhari. So we can't say, oh, look, it's found in 10 other books. A Sunni brother or sister that follows their Shaykh will tell you that, yeah, but it's not in Bukhari, so there must be an issue there. And we can't hold them and say, no, there's something wrong with you. Brothers and sisters, that's not how academics works. So what are we supposed to do here? We have to understand where they're coming from. We will present our reasoning. We will say, well, if it's in 10 other books, then why is it not mentioned in Bukhari? So there must be a problem here. But if a person is not convinced, we can't call them out for that and say, oh, see, there must be something wrong. There must be some animosity towards Ahlul-Bayt in that person's heart. No, brothers and sisters, that's not how our ulama teach us to have. That's not the approach our ulama teach us when it comes to these polemics and these discussions that we have. All right. Having said all of that, let's move on to the fifth hadith that Ayatollah Subhani uses. He says, look, the hadith of Thaqalain, which without a doubt Shi'i and Sunni believe is a mutawatir hadith. Everyone believes that this was something the Prophet said, but yes, the wording, exactly what it was, there's a little bit of difference there. But there is no doubt that the Prophet spoke about his Ahlul Bayt and introduced his Ahlul Bayt as being one of the Thaqalain. Okay, so we'll talk about the sources of this, we'll talk about what the hadith says, the wording, different wordings and all of that. Inshallah, let's see how far we can get tonight. It says, Hadith al-Thaqalain, the two precious things, or the two weighty things. Alright, when something is weighty, that means it's very valuable. What is this hadith about? This hadith is one of those classified in Islam. He didn't say Shi'ism, he says in Islam, as mutawatir. Everyone believes it's mutawatir. And is found in many books written by scholars of both branches of Islam, Shi'i, Sunni. In this hadith, the Prophet is preaching to the whole community. And what does he say? The hadith goes like this. Verily, I am leaving with you two precious things. The book of God and my progeny, my Ahlul Bayt. So two things, the book of God and his progeny who are the Ahlul Bayt. For as long as you cling to these two, you will never go astray. And truly, they will not be parted from each other until they join me at the pool of paradise. Al-Kawthar. Okay. That is the hadith. Okay, well, how do you get that the Imams have to be successors of the Holy Prophet out of this hadith? He explains. He says this hadith places side by side the authoritative knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt and the Quran, thereby requiring Muslims to hold fast in matters of faith, both to the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. Okay, let me explain this a little bit more, and then after I explain, there are some things I need to say as well. Look, The Quran and the Ahlul-Bayt have been put next to each other in this hadith. What does that mean? Well, and the Prophet is saying to cling to both of them. And they're not going to separate until they take you to Jannah. Okay. How am I supposed to cling to the Quran, brothers and sisters? How am I supposed to cling to the Quran? You cling to the Quran by what? Holding on to the book, like the actual physical book, and holding it in your hands. I'm clinging to the Quran, right? As if it's going to magically take you to Jannah if you hold on to it tight enough. Yeah? Is that what it is? Of course not. No one's going to say that. Clinging to the Quran means following its teachings. Following it. 100%. Yes? Okay. But then it says also, and my Ahlul-Bayt. Clinging, one verb with two objects. Clinging to, one, the Quran, two, to the Ahlul-Bayt. Here no one can say, clinging means respecting Ahlul-Bayt, loving them. No, no, no. Or else he would have said, clinging to the Quran, loving Ahlul-Bayt. Following Quran, loving Ahlul-Bayt. Keeping their respect. He didn't word it like that. He used the same verb for two objects. Okay? The same verb for two objects. So it shows that the same way the verb is applied to the Quran, it's supposed to be applied to Ahlul-Bayt. That means the Quran has to be followed 100%. Ahlul-Bayt also have to be followed 100%. So love isn't enough here. More than love is what matters. Right? And so even after the Prophet passes away, let's just assume that the Prophet did not appoint anybody after him. Well, we can at least go to the Ahlul-Bayt and ask them, because the Quran hasn't mentioned it but explicitly, but the Ahlul-Bayt have. They can tell us what to do. We can go ask them, hey, who's the Khalifa after you, after the Holy Prophet? And they'll mention who it is. Yeah? That's how awesome this hadith can be. I'm not going to say is, I'm going to say can be. Why do I say that? Why do I use this wording? Because it all depends on whether or not someone accepts that this hadith was worded this way by the Prophet. We have a problem here, brothers and sisters. We have a problem. Alright? And the problem is that when we look at the sources for this hadith, although it is mutawatir, and all Muslims believe that the Prophet did put the Quran next to the Ahlul-Bayt, there's a difference of opinion regarding the wording of it. We have a problem here. Okay? Once again, I'm saying this not to say that the Shia now doesn't have reasoning. Oh my God, we lost the hadith of Thaqalain. No, no, no. It's going to take more work than we thought to use this hadith to prove our point. That's what I'm trying to get to here. And if there are people who are not convinced by our reasoning, we can't hold a grudge against them. We will hold the grudge against the people who, in the past, didn't let these hadiths reach the people unaltered. Yeah? As a result, we have people today who are a little confused maybe, and don't know the truth. Although they have the best of intentions, and they think they are following the truth when they have a different imam than the Shi'is do. Okay? That's the point I'm trying to make. So I don't want anyone to think, oh, look, he just took hadith al-Thaqalain away from us and we can't use it anymore. No, no, no. On the contrary, we can still use it very strongly, as a matter of fact. It just might take a little more work. That's all I'm saying. Now, why did I even make this point of the wording is different? Because if the wording of the hadith is different, then that argument of the Quran being placed next to Ahlul-Bayt in this hadith and the same verb being used for both of them, and we know how the verb is to be used for Quran, so the same application of that verb has to happen towards Ahlul-Bayt. As a result, we have to follow them 100%, whatever they tell us, or else our faith is flawed. Right? We won't be able to use that argument anymore. The wording is different, brothers and sisters, in different sources. First of all, I hate to break it to all of us, and it is very disappointing to say the least, that this hadith with the wording of Ahlul-Bayt and Quran, or Itrah, which is the same thing, family, Ahlul-Bayt and Quran, this combination, you will not find it in Bukhari anywhere. the most important hadith book in the Sunni school of thought, you won't find it there at all. What you might find is Quran or Kitab Allah and Sunnati, that the Prophet said, I'm leaving two weighty things, my Sunnah, my tradition, and the Quran. You might find that in Sahih al-Bukhari, but you won't find the one that says Itrati. Other than Bukhari though, because as you know, Sahih Bukhari is the first book of the Sunni school when it comes to hadiths. First here. But after that, Sahih Muslim and down, brothers and sisters, you will find this hadith with this word, with the wording of, or the combination of, Kitab Allah and Quran, and Ahlul-Bayt or Itra, not Sunnati. Okay? Now, we have another problem though, from Sahih Muslim and down. We do have this combination. We do. The right combination in our eyes is there. Quran and Ahlul Bayt. But the problem is the whole following part. In all of these hadiths from Sahih Muslim down, do the hadiths all use the same verb or not? The answer is no, unfortunately not. And so that's going to require us to do more work to prove it to them, that still the same verb should apply. I'm going to go, and that's where we will have tons of books written on Hadith al-Thaqalain. Okay? Now, one of those books that I want to read off of to you is the book of Hadith al-Thaqalain, it's called, by Ayatollah Sayyid Ali al-Husayni al-Milani. Alright? He is a person that's very heavily involved in polemics. And I hope I'm using that word correctly, yeah. And in this book of Hadith al-Thaqalain, he has brought the different versions of this hadith. I'm going to read those different versions to you to show you that the wording, unfortunately, is not always there. It's not on point from a Shi'i perspective. The first one is Sahih Muslim. The number 2, you can say, hadith book of our brothers and sisters in the Sunni school of thought. The wording that you have there, وَأَنَا تَارِكٌ فِيكُمْ ثَقَلَيْنِ, O people, I am leaving behind you two waiting things. Okay, great. Let's see. Does he say the book of God and his progeny, Ahlul-Bayt, or is he going to say book of God and his Sunnah? أَوَّلُهُمَا كِتَابُ اللَّهِ, and then he goes on, Ahlul-Bayti. So two things, alhamdulillah. We have the right combination here. It's not Sunnati, it's Ahlul-Bayti. But let's look at the verbs that are used. أَوَّلُهُمَا كِتَابُ اللَّهِ. The first of those two weighty things and precious things is the book of God. فِيهِ الْهُدَى وَالنُّورِ. There's guidance and light in that book for you. فَخُذُوا. Take كِتَابُ اللَّهِ وَاسْتَمْسِكُوا بِهِ. Cling to it. فَحَثَّ عَلَى كِتَابِ اللَّهِ وَرَغَّبَ فِيهِ ثُمَّ قَالَ. So the Prophet, the narration says the Prophet, he kept encouraging the people, yes, and emphasizing the book of God, and for people to take it, and then a new sentence starts. So those verbs belonged only to clinging and taking and sticking to, belong to book of God. ثُمَّ قَالَ. Then he went on to say, وَأَهْلَ بَيْتِي. The second thing that I'm leaving amongst you is my Ahlul Bayt. Okay, well, what are we supposed to do about them? أُذَكِّرُكُمُ اللَّهِ فِي أَهْلِ بَيْتِي. أُذَكِّرُكُمُ اللَّهِ فِي أَهْلِ بَيْتِي. أُذَكِّرُكُمُ اللَّهِ فِي أَهْلِ بَيْتِي. That's all he says about them. So he mentioned the Quran, said to cling to the Quran, follow the Quran. When he talks about his Ahlul Bayt though, he says, أُذَكِّرُكُمُ اللَّهِ فِي أَهْلِ بَيْتِي. That's all he says. He doesn't say cling to them in this hadith, in this version of the hadith. He doesn't say follow them. He says, I am reminding you and I'm warning you regarding my Ahlul Bayt. When it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's going to be very serious about my Ahlul Bayt. In other words, you respect them, you love them, and all of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you follow them the way you follow the Quran. This is the problem, brothers and sisters. Now the Shia school of thought will have arguments that even this hadith can be used still. Okay? But it's going to take more work than we thought then. Where are we going to cover that? In the deeper books. Yes, as I said, there are tons of books written on this matter. That's not our job right now in these classes. Okay. What else do we have? Ma akhrajahu Ahmad bin Hanbal, his book. Okay, one of the Sihah Sitta, one of the 6 main books, hadith books of the Sunni school. What does he have there? Inni tarikun fikum khalifatain. I'm leaving behind you 2 things that are going to fill my shoes. Kitab Allah hablun mamdud ma bayna as-sama'i wal ard. The book of God, which is the rope between the heavens and the earth. In other words, that's your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa itrati ahli bayti, and my itra, my family, my Ahlul-Bayt. These are the 2 khalifas that I have left behind me. So you have the word khalifa here. But khalifa doesn't mean ruler, imam, and things like that. Why? Because the Quran is not a khalifa in that sense. Right? So here khalifa just means it is used in its literal sense. Khalifa means something that is left behind. Okay? In this hadith, he didn't say thaqalain, 2 precious things. He said 2 khalifas, 2 things that I'm leaving behind for you. In other words, they're precious. Right? Or else he wouldn't refer to them as the things that he's leaving behind. Right? You have to understand that. So once again, this hadith, it can't be used the way the Shia use it in their version of the hadith. Okay. But we do have one in Sahih, or the book of At-Tirmidhi. Yes, the Sahih of Tirmidhi, it says that Jabir bin Abdullah said that I saw the Holy Prophet in his Hajj on the day of Arafah, and he was on his camel, and he was addressing the people. He said, Ya ayyuhan nas, قد تركت فيكم ما إن أخذتم به لن تضلوا كتاب الله وعترة أهل بيتي. This is in line with the Shi'i version, brothers and sisters, but it's in Sahih Tirmidhi. What does the hadith say? It says, O people, I'm leaving behind you that which, if you take it and stick to it, you will never be misguided. Oh, this is a very clear hadith, brothers and sisters. Very clear. You will not get misguided. That means if you get your religion from anywhere else other than these 2, you have misguidance. What are they? The book of God and my itra, my Ahlul-Bayt. So this hadith is very, very clear and is in line with the Shi'i version. But it's Sahih Tirmidhi. Sahih Tirmidhi cannot stand alone against Musnad of Ahmad bin Hanbal plus Sahih Muslim plus the fact that Bukhari doesn't even have this hadith. Okay, we have to understand that. So no, you can't go up to a Sunni brother or sister and be like, how dare you not follow the Ahlul Bayt the same way you follow the Quran? Because you have a hadith in Tirmidhi. They'll say, well, we have other books that are more important that have another version or haven't even mentioned it. So those will override and overrule this hadith in Tirmidhi maybe. So it's going to take more work from the Shi'i scholars to use these hadiths to prove. I'm not saying it's not possible, just saying it's going to be harder. It's going to take more work. Alright, let me see how many more. I have like 3 or 4 more hadiths and then I'm going to end from the Sunni sources. Alright, we have a hadith, I don't know if these are hadiths now or, yeah, they are hadiths. It says, Ma akhrajahu Ibn Sa'd wa Ahmad wa Tabarani. That Abu Sa'id al-Khudri said, that the Prophet said, Inni tarikun fikum ma in akhadhtum bihi lan tadillu ba'di. Now these books are not first-tier hadith books, brothers and sisters. That the Prophet said, I am leaving behind 2 things that, or whatever, I am leaving behind you that which, if you cling onto it, if you take it, then you will not be misguided after me, ever. Okay, so this one's just like the one that's in At-Tirmidhi. So this one's also in line with the Shi'i version. Another book, Al-Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shaybah, he says, also has good wording. Good in the sense of Like it's in line with the Shi'i version. It says that the Prophet said, "Inni taraktu fikum ma lan tadillu ba'di in i'tasamtum bihi, kitab Allah wa itrati ahl bayti." That the Prophet said, "I'm leaving behind that which you will not be misguided after me if you i'tasamtum bihi, if you cling onto it, the Book of God and my Ahlul-Bayt." Another one from At-Tirmidhi has the same wording again that we had above in the first one that we had from Tirmidhi. And finally, Al-Hakim An-Nisaburi. Hakim An-Nisaburi, we have to understand. He has a book, Al-Mustadrak ala Sahihain. What he does is, he goes and finds hadiths. Now this is cool. This is pretty cool. It's pretty cool to know this. That there are books of the Shi'i school, Sunni school have books called Mustadrak books. What do Mustadrak books do? What's their job? What their job is that the one who compiles that book, he's compiling, usually this is the case, if not always, he's compiling a book of hadiths that are comprised of hadiths with people in the chains of those hadiths that are accepted by authors of other hadith books, that those authors of other hadith books didn't bring those hadiths in their books. I'll explain with an example. I know that was super confusing, so I'm sorry. Let me explain what is meant. A book of Mustadrak, look, let's say Al-Bukhari himself, okay? He has a list of narrators of hadith that he trusts, that he relies on, okay? A set of, 20, 30, 40, 100 narrators of hadiths. And so he will bring the hadiths that these narrators have mentioned. Okay. Sometimes though, there are some hadiths out there that have the same chains of narrators or the same reliable narrators to Al-Bukhari that he doesn't bring that hadith. So, there's a hadith that has all the narrators in it are narrators that he uses in his book of hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, right? Yet that hadith he doesn't bring it in his book. A book of Mustadrak of Sahih al-Bukhari, what it will do is it will bring those hadiths that have been missed by al-Bukhari himself. Will bring them there. In other words, Bukhari, you should have brought this in your book because the narrators are all accepted by you. Why didn't you bring it? Okay. Hakim al-Nisaburi, everyone knows, is one of the Ahlul Sunnah, one of the muhaddithin of Ahlul Sunnah of Ahlul Sunnah. In his book, he has some of these hadiths. One of them is Hadith al-Thaqalain. Now, we have to understand once again, just because it is in the book of Al-Mustadrak, and all the narrators of the hadith are narrators that Al-Bukhari might believe in, right? There might be still a reason why he didn't bring it in his book. He might feel that this hadith does not match the teachings of Islam that he believes in. And so yet, although the narrators are all reliable to him, he still might not bring that hadith in his book. We have to understand this, brothers and sisters. So, even though Al-Hakim, who is very famous, brings it in his book of Al-Mustadrak and says, hey, Al-Bukhari, you missed this hadith. It doesn't mean, once again, that we can hold this and say, oh, see, people, now, so you must believe in it. No, they'll say, look, at the end of the day, Bukhari didn't bring it in his book. So there must be a reason. He might have felt like, although the narrators are all narrators that he believes in, but this hadith is wrong for whatever reason. That's why he didn't bring it. But a book of Mustadrak brings these hadiths anyway, because academically speaking, it can be brought in a Mustadrak book to show that, look, this is at the end of the day a hadith that was missed. So Al-Hakim brings this hadith in his book, and this one is really like the Shi'i version. Is Mustadrak of Hakim a first tier hadith book? Not necessarily, once again. So it won't be able to stand up against the rest, but it's better than nothing. And our Shi'i scholars have used this as well to prove certain points. So what does the hadith say before I end? I'll end. After this hadith, inshallah, I'm going to end. And then we'll continue next week where we leave off today. Hakim says, the hadith, he says, Nazar Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam bayna Mecca wal Medina. That the Prophet, he stood in a place between Mecca and Medina where there were some trees, and he says some other things. So the people, what they did, they kind of broomed that area of all the thorns or whatever it was under the trees, made it ready for him. So the Prophet went up and he said, and he prayed, and then he said, as he was delivering a sermon, and he praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he reminded the people and preached them, and all of that, all of which God would want him to say, ثُمَّ قَالَ أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنِّي تَارِكٌ فِيكُمْ أَمْرَيْنِ لَن تَضِلُّوا إِنِ اتَّبَعْتُمُوهُمَا وَهُمَا كِتَابُ اللَّهِ وَأَهْلُ بَيْتِ عِتْرَتِي. That he said that, O people, I am leaving amongst you two things. You will never be misguided afterwards if you follow them. The Book of God and Ahlul-Bayti, not Sunnati, Ahlul-Bayti. And then the hadith goes on. It says, ثُمَّ قَالَ, do you not know that I take preference and precedence over the people themselves, the mu'mineen themselves? He said this 3 times. Am I not the highest amongst you, that I take precedence over all of you? In other words, if I say something, you have to follow me, even if it goes against your own will. And the people said, yes, O Prophet. And so the Prophet said, Man kuntu mawlahu, fa'aliyun mawlahu. Whoever I am his mawla, then Ali is his mawla. He said this after he said that I take precedence over you. So whoever I have wilaya over, Imam Ali has wilaya over him. So as you can see here, the hadith of Ghadir and hadith of Thaqalain in this account are merged into one. Okay? But I don't want to get into hadith of Ghadir right now. But as you can see, this is very in line with the Shi'i understanding of this hadith and the Shi'i version of it, yes. And so these all are put together by our Shi'i scholars to make a point in regards to hadith al-Thaqalain. I'm going to end it at this point and leave it there. Next week we're going to go more into hadith of Ghadir, inshallah. Yes, the hadith of Ghadir and the discussions there. But as I said again and again throughout our talk today, that brothers and sisters understand, and even if our Sunni brothers and sisters might be listening to this later in the future, we have to understand that there are tons of books written regarding this topic of hadith al-Thaqalain, and all of the discussions regarding the chain of narrators and the different books that have brought this hadith and the different versions of it, and what each version of this hadith is actually implying, and so on and so forth. There's lots of books written on them, so we just, I just gave you a taste of what's going on in this session. Once again, as I said last week, these sessions are also, the audio of them can be accessed via the different podcast apps out there. All you need to do is just search Mizan Institute. You'll find it in the different apps that are out there, these podcast apps that are out there. Those of you who want to listen to these sessions on your way to work or on the way back, that is much more convenient than having to watch the video. Although watching the video, of course, has its own perks as well. Okay. So with that, I'll leave you all to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep us in your du'as until next week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.